The sound of crackling ice pierced the air as the alien vessel hovered just above the frozen wasteland. Below, a group of humans marched, their breath turning to mist in the bitter cold, but their faces were filled not with fear, but with laughter. It was the sort of laughter that echoed across the icy desert, defying everything the aliens had assumed about these strange creatures. "How is this possible?" one of the aliens whispered, its voice trembling in disbelief. It had been observing humans for weeks, hoping to learn why they hadn't perished from the brutal freezing temperatures that would have wiped out any other species. Yet here they were, laughing, smiling, as if the deadly cold was a mere inconvenience. On the ground, a man named Callum, mid-40s, hardened by years of scientific exploration, stood among a group of survivors. He grinned at the blizzard swirling around them, the wind so fierce that they could freeze the blood in your veins. Despite his frostbitten nose and cheeks, Callum's eyes shone with determination. "You think this is bad?" he called out to the others, his voice rising above the howling winds. "This is nothing. Come on. Let's keep moving." The team followed, their laughter still echoing across the vast, empty expanse of ice. For most, this would have been a death sentence. Yet for these humans, it was just another day. Their resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity seemed unfathomable to the alien observers. As the ship above them continued to track their movements, the alien commander turned to its fellow officers. "We must understand their nature. This, defiance against the laws of survival. We must learn why they are so different." But what the aliens didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly know, was that humans had something far more powerful than physical endurance. They had an unbreakable spirit. Callum, who had lost so much in his life, family, friends, and even his own will to survive, was about to show the aliens just how far that spirit could take them. He looked over his shoulder and spotted a flicker of movement in the distance, a group of civilians trapped in the snow, their bodies shivering from the freezing temperatures. They were close to collapse, their eyes wide with fear. But Callum didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. "Get ready, everyone," he shouted. "We've got people to save." With that, he led his team toward the stranded civilians, not a hint of fear or doubt in his voice. His steps were sure, even as the cold bit into his skin. In that moment, Callum was more than just a man, he was a symbol of human strength. Not the strength of muscle or technology, but the strength of the heart. The aliens above watched in awe, confused by this display of courage. How could these fragile beings withstand what would break the strongest of their own species? The aliens would soon find out. Humans had a secret they couldn't possibly comprehend. Their ability to survive wasn't just about endurance. It was about something much deeper, something that would change the course of the aliens' mission forever. The group of civilians was only 100 meters away, but every step toward them felt like an eternity. The wind howled, cutting through the fabric of their clothes, freezing everything it touched. Callum's hands were numb, his feet heavy with the weight of the snow, but his resolve never wavered. Behind him, the rest of his team moved swiftly, their faces grim yet focused. "This is our moment," Callum muttered to himself, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. His mind flashed back to the days before they had arrived on this desolate planet, the days before the cold had begun to take hold of everything they knew. The alien force, in its arrogance, had assumed that humanity would buckle under the extreme temperatures. That the freezing world would break them. But it hadn't. No, they had adapted. They had endured. Callum reached the first civilian, a young woman, barely out of her teens, trembling from the cold but still alive. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked with his. "Hey, it's okay," Callum said, dropping to one knee. "We're getting you out of here. Stay with me. You're safe now." She nodded weakly, but the effort it took to even acknowledge him was evident. He could see the frostbite creeping across her fingers, the blue tint to her lips. Callum had no medical training, but he knew survival. He grabbed her, lifting her gently from the ground, and motioned for the others to help. "We need to move fast," he ordered. "The more we stay out here, the harder it will be." His team, now working together seamlessly, carried the civilians back toward the shelter they had set up. It was a small, makeshift compound they'd built using what little they had: metal scraps, fabric, and parts of their vehicles. A place to survive, for as long as they could. But even as they moved, the cold continued to claw at their skin, a constant reminder that the world they now inhabited was a place of relentless, merciless temperatures. And they were still a long way from the safety of their shelter. Meanwhile, high above, the alien ship continued its silent observation. The commander, who had spent days analyzing the humans' behavior, now found himself puzzled. They weren't acting like creatures on the verge of death. They were moving with purpose, with unity, even in the face of certain doom. They should have collapsed by now, the commander muttered to itself. This doesn't make sense. The aliens had assumed that humans, being biologically weaker than them, would eventually succumb to the cold. It wasn't just the physical survival that intrigued them, it was the mental resilience. How could these creatures, who were so frail, endure so much without breaking? The commander turned to one of its officers. "Send a team down. We need to understand why they are so different from us." As the alien ship prepared to dispatch its crew, Callum's team reached the shelter, the civilians now safe within its walls. But as soon as the door shut behind them, Callum exhaled in relief. They had made it. For now. Inside the shelter, they started tending to the injured. There were more civilians to help, but Callum knew they needed a plan to secure their long-term survival. It wasn't just the cold that threatened them, it was the unknown that lurked in the frozen wasteland outside. The alien threat was real, and it was closing in. "We're not safe yet," Callum said, his voice firm. "We need to fortify our position. And we need to make sure those civilians are as safe as possible. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." A voice from behind him interrupted. "Callum," it was Rhea, his longtime friend and the head of the medical team. "We need to talk." He turned to face her. The worry in her eyes was evident, and for the first time, Callum felt a flicker of doubt. "What's wrong?" "Something's off," Rhea said, her voice low. "The civilians we brought in, there's something strange about them. Some of them are already showing signs of adapting to the cold." Callum frowned. "Adapting? You're sure?" Rhea nodded, her brow furrowed. "Their bodies, they're handling the cold better than anyone should. Almost like they've been here before." The implications were immediate. If these civilians were somehow adapting to the cold, it meant that the very survival strategies they had used for themselves were already outdated. It meant the planet wasn't just cold, it was changing them. "We need to find out what's going on," Callum said. "We can't be blind to the bigger picture." Before they could discuss further, the ground beneath their feet shook. A low, resonant hum filled the shelter, followed by the sound of something large landing outside. "Get ready," Callum said, standing up abruptly. "It's them. The aliens." As the door to the shelter rattled, the aliens had finally made their move. They were coming for the humans, for the very answers that had eluded them. And Callum knew one thing: they were about to learn why humans never gave up. The low hum outside grew louder, shaking the walls of their shelter. Callum's breath caught in his throat, and for a split second, everything fell silent. It was the kind of silence that makes you hold your breath and wonder if it's the calm before the storm, or if the storm is already here. "They're here," Rhea whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing hum. Callum's hand tightened around the makeshift weapon at his side. A few civilians huddled near the far corner, some too terrified to even move. They had seen enough of the alien ships to know what it meant when they landed. But the way they had been observing them? It wasn't just a typical attack. The aliens weren't just invading, they were testing, probing, trying to understand. Callum stepped toward the door, his team following closely behind. He knew the odds. He knew what would happen if they were caught off guard. But he also knew that hesitation meant defeat, and defeat meant death. They had come too far to back down now. He pushed the door open just a crack, peering out into the bitter landscape. The alien ship loomed above them, its massive form casting a shadow over the snow-covered ground. The ship was metallic and smooth, with no obvious seams or markings, an eerie, flawless design. It hovered just inches from the ground, silent, almost like it was waiting for something. "Callum," Rhea said, her voice steady but urgent, "if we're going to survive this, we need to know what they want. Not just what they can do to us, but why they haven't attacked yet." Callum nodded, his mind racing. The aliens had been observing them for days, testing them in ways they couldn't understand. But now, it seemed, the game had changed. The ship's doors slowly began to open, revealing a contingent of alien soldiers. They were taller than any human, their bodies sleek and armored, and their eyes, if you could even call them eyes, shimmered with an unnatural glow. Their presence was as cold as the air around them. "They're not here to destroy us, not yet," Callum muttered. He turned to Rhea, his voice low. "We need to make contact. If they've been watching us this whole time, they've seen that we're not easy to kill. That's why they're waiting." Rhea's eyes widened with realization. "They think we're a threat?" "Exactly," Callum said, his jaw tight. "They want to know if we'll break. If we'll bend under their pressure. But they're making a mistake. Humans don't break, not the way they think we do." The aliens approached the shelter, their movements deliberate. Callum motioned for his team to stay hidden behind the reinforced walls. The civilians were already being ushered further into the shelter, safe for the moment. There was no room for fear now. Callum had seen fear in the eyes of the humans he'd saved, but fear was a luxury they couldn't afford. Not now. As the aliens neared the entrance, Callum stepped out into the cold, facing them head-on. The freezing air bit into his skin, but he stood tall, refusing to shrink under their gaze. One of the aliens raised a long, slender arm and made a low clicking sound, a sound that seemed to resonate in the air. A moment passed. Then, the alien spoke. It was nothing like any language Callum had ever heard, a series of mechanical clicks, whirs, and pulses. Yet, somehow, he understood it. "You are strong," the alien's voice echoed in his mind, its tone calculated and cold. "Stronger than anticipated. But why do you endure? What is the reason for your resistance?" Callum didn't flinch. He met the alien's gaze, his voice unwavering. "We survive because we have to. We endure because we don't know how not to." The alien's eyes flickered, processing his words, and then it tilted its head slightly. It was trying to understand. "You are broken?" the alien asked, the question seemingly genuine, though its tone was far from sympathetic. "No," Callum replied firmly. "We're not broken. And we won't be." There was a long silence as the alien seemed to process his response. The soldiers around it remained still, their weapons gleaming, but they didn't move. Callum could feel the weight of their presence, the intensity of their scrutiny. He knew they were calculating something. Then, another voice echoed from behind the leader, this one softer, less mechanical. "This one is different." The voice was almost human, but not quite. It sent a shiver down Callum's spine. The voice continued, its tone growing more curious. "Why have you not yielded to the cold? Why do you not break beneath its touch like other lifeforms?" Callum took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "Humans don't give up. We don't break, even when we're pushed to our limits. You think the cold can destroy us, but it's just another test. We've been through worse. The alien commander studied him for a moment longer. Then, a soft, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. The ship's engines thrummed with power as if responding to something Callum couldn't understand. "You will show us," the alien leader declared. "We will test you. You will endure or you will fall." Callum's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure if this was a challenge or a warning, but one thing was certain: this was far from over. The aliens had underestimated humanity before, but now, they were about to see the true strength of the human spirit. "We will show you," Callum said, his voice a low growl. "And you'll learn exactly why we never give up." The freezing wind howled outside the shelter, biting through the cracks in the walls like a hungry beast. The temperature had plummeted even further, but Callum didn't feel it, not in the way the aliens probably expected. His hands, though cold, remained steady. He wasn't going to break. "Are you ready?" Rhea's voice echoed behind him, strained but determined. She had her hand on the makeshift rifle they'd crafted from scavenged parts. She looked at him for confirmation, knowing the plan was about to change drastically. Callum nodded once, though his heart hammered in his chest. The aliens were testing them, putting them through trials, each more punishing than the last. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't about simply enduring the cold, the pain, or the fear. It was about proving something far greater: humanity's will to stand tall when faced with the impossible. The alien ship hovered ominously over the shelter, casting a long shadow that seemed to darken the very ground beneath their feet. A faint buzz hummed from above. The air was dense with tension. Then, a large metallic door on the ship's underside opened, revealing a floating platform, and 3 aliens emerged from the ship's belly. Their figures, sleek and silver, glimmered beneath the harsh lights of the ship. One of them, the leader, stepped forward and fixed its glowing eyes on Callum. The silence between them felt like a pressure, a weight pressing down on his chest. The leader spoke in its mechanical, yet eerily intelligible voice: "You said you would endure. Now you will prove it." It raised a hand and, in an instant, the temperature plummeted further. Ice crackled as it spread across the ground, and the air became even more suffocating, biting into every exposed inch of skin. Callum's breath fogged in the air, but he didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on the aliens as the frigid cold bit into his bones. "You claim to endure this. But for how long?" The leader's voice dripped with disdain, a challenge. Callum gritted his teeth. "As long as it takes." The alien motioned to its companions, who moved swiftly to a corner of the shelter, their long, metallic arms glowing faintly. The ground beneath Callum's feet began to rumble, and the temperature dropped again. This time, he could feel the cold more acutely, the air thickening with frost. His breath clouded, each exhale painful as the sub-zero temperatures pressed down. His body shuddered with the bite of the cold, and his fingers ached, each movement like dragging his hands through ice. But still, Callum stood tall. "Humanity is defined by what we survive, not by how comfortable we are," Callum muttered to himself, though he knew the alien couldn't hear him. But Rhea could. "You okay?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "I'm fine," he said, forcing the words out. His teeth chattered, but his resolve was stronger. The others, civilians included, huddled inside, but Callum refused to retreat. Rhea's face was grim, but she stayed at his side. They had to show the aliens something. They had to show them that human resilience was more than just enduring pain, it was pushing through the impossible with nothing but sheer determination and a refusal to quit. The aliens, seemingly impressed by Callum's unwillingness to break, moved closer. One of them raised a hand again, and the temperature plummeted once more, as if daring Callum to fall. His body was beginning to feel the strain. It was getting harder to breathe. His breath came out in labored gasps, and the cold seemed to wrap itself around his chest, squeezing tighter with each passing moment. Still, he stayed standing. The aliens observed, silent, watching. But Callum could feel the growing anticipation in the air. They weren't sure how long a human could endure. And that uncertainty, they could sense it. But Callum wasn't going to show weakness. He gritted his teeth, his body shaking, but his stance unwavering. He had seen his people face far worse, natural disasters, wars, hunger, and they'd endured. And each time, they had come out stronger. It was no different now. "Tell me," the alien leader spoke again, its voice softer now. "What drives you? What makes you so unwilling to submit to the cold?" Callum looked straight at it, his vision blurry from the pain. "It's not the cold that drives us. It's the will to survive. We don't give up. We push through, no matter what." The alien was silent for a moment, its glowing eyes flickering as if processing his words. The temperature remained impossibly low, but Callum didn't flinch. "Not this time." "Why do you not fear it?" The question echoed in Callum's mind. "You should be breaking by now." Callum took a labored step forward, ignoring the sharp pain in his legs. "We fear nothing. And we break for no one." The aliens paused. There was no immediate response. Then, without warning, the temperature began to rise. Slowly at first, then rapidly. The sharp cold that had been tearing at Callum's body began to dissipate, and soon, it was gone entirely. The alien leader regarded him with what could only be described as curiosity. "You are truly, unlike anything we have encountered." Callum's chest heaved as he finally took in a deep breath, his body still aching from the cold, but his spirit unbroken. The aliens had learned something they hadn't expected: humanity wasn't something to be calculated. It wasn't something they could simply analyze and conquer. The strength of human will, its resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, was something the aliens had no framework for. And Callum had just proven it. The alien ship loomed overhead, casting an eerie shadow over the once warm and bustling settlement. The wind, though no longer freezing, still carried an unnatural chill. The triumphant gleam in Callum's eyes hadn't faded, but something in the back of his mind nagged at him. He had survived the aliens' test, but he knew this wasn't the end. Nothing was ever that simple. "You should have broken, Callum," Rhea whispered as they retreated to the shelter's interior, the door slamming shut behind them. The cold was gone, but the weight of their victory felt heavy, like a storm just waiting to break. "They'll never stop testing us." "Let them try," Callum replied, his voice firm. His words, though strong, barely masked the exhaustion creeping into his limbs. He had pushed his body to its limits, but the cold wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The aliens were learning, and with each test, they grew more dangerous. The humans huddled inside, gathered around a makeshift table in the center of the room. It was quiet now, the kind of silence that could easily turn to fear. Everyone had seen Callum's near collapse after the cold test. Despite their resolve, no one was sure how much more they could take. Rhea's face was pale, her brow furrowed in thought. She was always the strategist, the one who kept her head even in the worst of circumstances. But this time, even she seemed unsure. "Callum, they're not just here to watch us survive," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "They want to break us, no matter what it takes." He nodded, turning to face the small group gathered at the table. His eyes swept over them, the civilians, the fighters, everyone who had rallied under his command. Each person was strong in their own right, but even the strongest would crack under the pressure of constant, unrelenting tests. The aliens had pushed them to the brink and they had endured, but for how long? "They won't break us," Callum said again, more to reassure himself than anyone else. "We have something they don't understand, a will that can't be measured or predicted." Rhea didn't seem convinced. "What happens when their tests go beyond survival? What happens when they start testing us on our values, our humanity?" Callum felt a chill at the thought. The aliens hadn't shown any interest in the humans' emotions yet, but he knew better than to assume they wouldn't. After all, they were testing them not just as survivors but as beings of will and spirit. The moment they understood that, the stakes would change. The rest of the night passed in tense silence, everyone wary of what the aliens would do next. And when dawn broke, they had their answer. The sound of the ship's engines hummed in the distance, followed by a low, mechanical whirring as the aliens deployed a small craft. It hovered for a moment, its lights blinking in rhythm with the pulse of the ship above. And then, it descended to the ground with a soft thud. The door opened, and 3 of the aliens emerged, this time without their usual gleaming armor. Their skin was a dull gray, and their eyes were hollow, almost as if they were weary from something they couldn't explain. Callum stepped forward, his posture firm but cautious. "What is this?" he asked, his voice steady despite the undercurrent of unease. The alien leader stepped up first, its head lowering in what Callum could only interpret as acknowledgement, or maybe even respect. But there was something different in the leader's eyes now. There was no contempt, no challenge, only something else, something foreign. "You survived," the leader began, its voice lower and more reflective than before. "You proved your will. But now, we test something else." Callum's heart skipped a beat. "What's the next test?" The leader gestured to the other 2 aliens, who moved to the side, revealing a small figure behind them. A woman, bound in strange restraints. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. But the moment Callum laid eyes on her, a cold wave of realization hit him. It was Rhea's mother. His chest tightened, his mind racing. Rhea stood frozen beside him, her breath hitching as her mother struggled against the restraints. Callum didn't need to say a word. Rhea had already seen it too. Her mother's eyes locked with hers, but Rhea's mouth went dry, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. "What have you done to her?" Rhea demanded, her voice cracking. The leader regarded her with a cold stare. "This is the price of defiance. You were strong, but your strength came at a cost. Now, we see if your humanity is stronger than your will." Rhea's hand shot to the makeshift weapon at her side, but Callum caught her arm before she could draw it. He knew what she was thinking: strike now, fight back. But this wasn't the same. The aliens weren't threatening just their survival, they were threatening everything they stood for. Callum stepped forward, forcing his voice to remain steady. "If you think we'll break because of this, you're wrong," he said, looking directly into the alien leader's eyes. "We'll face whatever you throw at us. But we won't give in." The leader was silent for a moment, its cold eyes scanning the group before it spoke again. "We will see. Will you choose survival over humanity?" Rhea's mother, struggling weakly against her bonds, was the only one who seemed unaffected by the tension. Her eyes, though filled with fear, also held a quiet strength. She wasn't going to give in either. Callum saw it in her, her refusal to show weakness, even in the face of certain death. It was a cruel game, but the humans were learning the rules. And if the aliens thought they could break them by testing their humanity, by testing their ability to choose between survival and compassion, they had another thing coming. Callum knew this was just the beginning. They had survived the cold. But now, they would have to survive something even darker. Something far harder than the freezing winds. The test of the heart. The air felt heavier now, thick with the weight of decisions that had to be made. Callum stood frozen, his gaze never leaving Rhea's mother, who struggled against her restraints, her breath shallow but determined. Behind him, he could feel Rhea trembling slightly, her eyes flicking from her mother to the alien leader, a quiet fury in her heart. "They want us to choose, Callum," Rhea whispered, her voice barely audible. "They want us to choose between survival and our humanity." Callum clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. The aliens' games had gone too far. This wasn't about tests anymore. This was about breaking their spirits, testing their very souls. The alien leader, still silent, stepped forward slowly, its expression unreadable. It made no move to approach Rhea's mother, but the message was clear: her life was now in their hands, and they would do what they pleased with it. The question wasn't whether they could survive, but whether they could maintain their humanity in the face of unimaginable choices. Choose, the leader said simply, the words carrying the weight of an entire universe's expectations. Your survival depends on this choice. Callum's mind raced. What did they want from them? He could almost feel the cold steel of the alien stare digging into his soul, probing, testing. And yet, as he stood there was no fear, no hesitation. He had seen things far worse than this during his time as a soldier, things that tested him in ways he never thought possible. This was just another test. But it wasn't about what they could do to them. It was about what they could do to each other. Callum, Rhea's voice cracked again. You can't be serious. If we don't do something, they'll. I know what they'll do, he said, cutting her off. And we can't let them turn us into monsters. We have to remember who we are. The alien leader observed him closely. There was a strange quiet, a moment of understanding that passed between them, an acknowledgement that this wasn't just about survival. This was about something more. Something deeper. We will not fight you for your survival, Callum continued, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the air. But we will not give in to your games. If you want to test us, you'll see we're stronger than you think. The leader seemed to consider this, its eyes narrowing as if processing his words. But just when Callum thought they might be getting through, the alien leader's next words hit him like a blow to the chest. This is the test, the leader said softly, almost too quietly. We will kill her. You will do nothing. You will choose to survive, or you will fail. Callum felt the weight of those words like a leaden weight in his chest. Rhea's mother's terrified eyes locked with his, pleading, but still holding a quiet strength. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't cower. And that only made the choice harder. Rhea stepped forward, her hands shaking but determined. She wasn't going to stand by and watch her mother die. Not when there was a chance to save her. You can't do this, Rhea said, her voice rising. You think you know what it means to be human, but you don't. We may be weak, we may be fragile, but that's what makes us strong. We have something you'll never understand. Love. Compassion. And if you think we'll choose survival over the lives of the people we love, you're wrong. The leader said nothing, but its gaze shifted to the two others standing by its side, who began to approach Rhea's mother. The restraints clicked with a cold, metallic sound as they began to loosen. Callum felt a cold fury surge through him. They had been tested, pushed to the brink, but this was different. He wasn't about to let the aliens tear apart what made them human. Not like this. Not for a test. Do it, then, Callum said, his voice low but full of conviction. Kill her. And you'll see exactly how wrong you are. For a moment, the world stood still. Time seemed to stretch as the aliens hesitated. They had not expected this reaction. But as the minutes passed, it became clear, the humans weren't like the creatures the aliens had encountered before. They had no desire to break, no desire to submit. Their survival wasn't worth more than the lives of the ones they loved. Then, in the most unexpected of moments, something incredible happened. Rhea's mother, with a force that startled everyone in the room, broke free from her restraints. Her eyes locked onto the alien leaders, her gaze filled with unyielding defiance. You think you can break us, she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been before. You think you can take our humanity from us? We've survived worse than this. We've lost so much. But we'll never lose ourselves. And with that, she stepped forward, pushing past the aliens who had been holding her back. They watched in stunned silence as she approached Rhea, her daughter's arms reaching out to hold her. In that moment, the test was no longer about survival. It was about something more profound, the power of love, the unbreakable bond between family, and the refusal to bow to fear. The alien leader turned its gaze to the others, then back to Callum. "You are unlike anything we have encountered," it said, its tone filled with something close to awe, or perhaps confusion. "You are stronger than we imagined." But Callum wasn't interested in their praise. He wasn't interested in their approval. He was only interested in one thing: they had passed the test. "Then we'll survive," he said quietly. "Not because of strength or will, but because of each other." The silence that followed was thick, the air heavy with something indescribable. The aliens stepped back, giving the humans a moment to gather themselves. It wasn't a victory, not really. But it was a triumph, a victory of humanity, of their refusal to be broken. And for the first time in this endless war, Callum felt something he hadn't felt before. Hope.